All right. Hello and welcome everybody to this panel discussion with three incredible superstars and storytellers. It is my privilege as the curator, I'm Nilay Bhatt, to be with all three of these panelists. Bilqis Abdul Qadir. Bilqis, salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Welcome to the panel as well. It's fantastic to have you as the first Muslim girl wearing a hijab to play for a D1 basketball team. And now, of course, as the founder as well of Dribbling Down Barriers. Thank you for joining us. Kenna, again, all of a young, early 20-year-olds, and to be the first honoree of the NCAA's LGBTQ award. Congratulations. Thank you for joining us too. And of course, as an advocate, as an activist, as a public speaker, and a social justice supporter as well, and being an educator, the future is bright, and we look forward to hearing more about you. Jason, thanks for joining us as well from Westminster, Colorado, one of the leading parks and recreation agencies in the country, a three-time gold medalist. Jason is the director of Parks, Recreation, and Libraries for the agency. Also grew up on the south side of Chicago, playing for a very interesting composition of a basketball team that we're about to get into just a little bit later. So wherever you are, please join me in a virtual welcome and an applause for these fantastic panelists. So Bilqis, let's start with you. When we discussed as well, you mentioned you were the baby of the family growing up, and just what was that like for you growing up as well? And how did you get into basketball?
So I was born and raised in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is the birthplace of basketball. And it's funny, a lot of people don't actually know that, but it's a fact. And I'm not gonna let anybody else take that from my state and my city. But again, I am the youngest of 8. I have 4 sisters and 3 brothers. We were all born Muslims, and basketball was just a part of our culture at that point. You know, again, born in the city of basketball, it was all we saw. It was, you know, and then it ended up all we did. Yeah. And, you know, being the baby, you know, you hold a lot of weight. So if I didn't play, I may have been bullied by my own siblings. So I had to go ahead and pick up that ball.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So who were you following and who were you sort of looking up to and playing when you did go out to play at the parks or where you did?
Yeah, so I really started at the age of 5, got my first hoop, but basketball became more than just a hobby when I was around the age of 12. Yeah. And my parents had a very serious conversation with me, and they said, look, you know, we can't afford college, so you're gonna have to use either your skill or your academics to figure out a way to get a scholarship to school. And, you know, at 12, that's not something a normal 12-year-old should be thinking about. But again, I'm the youngest. I saw my parents, you know, kind of financially struggle with my other siblings' tuition. And I'm like, I don't want to see them, you know, have to struggle with me. So what can I do to help out? And at that point, I used the basketball as a tool to kind of pave that way to a higher education. And it started in local parks against boys who hated to play against me. I would walk on courts, and at first they would look at me like, no, you're not going to play with us. And then when I got out there, those boys were like, who's going to guard her? They would actually rotate all 5 boys to see who was going to stop me. And so I made a name for myself around the neighborhood. And it really started from there. I wanted to be the best, you know, in my city to potentially get recruited.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Kenna, you know a little bit about struggle to growing up with your mom as a Somali immigrant and, you know, you being one of 3 siblings too. Tell us more about your childhood and what was that like growing up?
Yeah, so my mom came to the U.S. from Somalia around, 30 years ago, and she really imparted a gratitude and a humbleness and, you know, the way I do everything. And I too am I'm not the youngest sibling, but I also have siblings. I was the middle child. So I was kind of forced to have a lot of, you know, independence when I was, once my younger sister was born. And having an older brother, you know, for me was probably the biggest athletic advantage, you know, I ever could have asked for. He's about 2 years older than me. And I always was the smallest one playing with him and his friends. And I always would get, you know, beaten up on and bullied. And it really made me want to get better. and going to his practices when I was younger and just watching on the sidelines and trying to emulate everything on the court by myself on the little hoop really made me fall in love with basketball as well.
That's great. That's great. Does he still bully you just a little bit as the older brother?
Not anymore. Once I hit 16 or 17 and I started to take basketball more seriously, and he kind of he stopped playing as much. No longer happens.
Yeah. There seems to be a little bit of a thread here of, playing in the parks and playing more at the grassroots level. And Jason, that's something you obviously know very well about in your professional world. But tell us about you growing up in Chicago, and what was that like for you?
It was incredible, Neela. It was really incredible. I grew up in a city called Richton Park, which is south of Chicago. Spent a lot of time in the south side. My mom's family is from Bridgeport, just South Chicago area, and spent a lot of time there in Chicago parks playing a ton of basketball. But it was really a tremendous upbringing, I got to tell you, and exposure to a lot of different opportunities. And I will say, through my teen years, especially, a time of absolutely tremendous change in cultures and folks, all throughout those years. But I have an older sister, not really into sports so much, so she didn't bully me like some other folks. But no, it was a great upbringing, and and the other thing that was really neat about how I was raised, I think. Full credit to my parents. My mom would regularly bring me to the inner city, regular volunteering. Although I grew up in essentially a privileged neighborhood, more or less. My mom would regularly bring me to the YMCA's, the YMCA Senior Center in Harvey, Illinois, for example, Tolentine, Olympia Fields, and just making sure I'm always exposed to different cultures and different people and different opinions. And I really just look back and I cherish what my parents had done for me.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And you acknowledge a little bit just in terms of growing up with privilege and going to the YMCA and seeing the haves and maybe the haves not, right? As you've experienced, you got to a point with sports as well. And I mean, how did you get into basketball, and what was that experience like for you?
Well, growing up where I grew up, just South Chicago and going to the inner city quite a bit, it's kind of what you did. And unfortunately, there also wasn't a whole lot of other sport options. Well, I say that, but then again, I was able to play some really great, basketball opportunities. So it's just kind of what you did. And I just remember, we'd play practically all night by the street lights, and most of the rims were half broken in Chicago, didn't have maybe metal net standing. And it's kind of how you bonded, with friends and getting to know people. And it's just kind of a calling to get out on the court and just have a good time.
That's great. That's great. Kenna, as you got into basketball, one of the things we had discussed was an incident in sixth grade with the travel team, and how much that shaped a sense of belonging or not in your mind at that time. Tell me more about that.
Absolutely. So yeah, when I was in, sixth grade, like most children that age, I just wanted to have fun. I just wanted, for me specifically, to play basketball. I was not too aware of, all the forms of exclusion and identity markers. But, in the town I grew up in, New Paltz, which is a small town around an hour north of New York City, there was a team created under the guise of CYO, which is a Christian or Catholic youth organization. And a team was created, and they essentially selected all the white players in my town, in my grade, many of who were not actually religious, who did not go to that church or parish. And they created a team, and they strategically excluded all the black players, even though some of us were also, some of the best players in the town. And, to see a team created that I was not allowed to be on, not because of my ability or my character, but because I was not white, really kind of opened me up to the ideas of inclusion and exclusion, and a lot of the systems that are used to marginalize folk, even outside of sports, but just in the world at large.
Yeah. That must have been hard. What did you all do something about it? Did you speak about it? Was there any action taken?
Yes, there was a couple newspaper articles that were put out at that time. Not by children, but by adults who really saw that. And the town itself tried to create their own team. We did not have the same resources, or we weren't able to go to all the same tournaments, but there was at least something created in a response and tried to give us all an opportunity as well to play.
Yeah. Speaking of opportunities to play, Bilkis, clearly you could ball and no one could guard you, which is great. But you also, getting into your freshman year, from a religious standpoint and just, how you were seeing life changed as well. What was that transformation like?
So really, at the age of 15 is when things got a little different for me. My physical appearance changed and I started to wear my hijab. And I was devastated. I was afraid. I thought that life was over when I had to step into this physical role of my faith. And I wasn't forced. I wasn't, demanded to do it, but I knew that my family and I believed in it. So it took me a while to go back to school, to high school, and I was homeschooled previously. So I finally get back to school, and it was just, I think I put more pressure, on myself than I needed to. People accepted me. However, personally, I still kind of felt apart. I looked different, but where I felt most comfortable was on the court. And although there were times that I would get taunted, teased, the fan sections would rip me apart. In Springfield, Massachusetts, and the neighboring cities, majority, we played Catholic schools. In a lot of, towns where there weren't a lot of minority. And it was tough, but I used that as fuel to kind of play even harder, score even more points, and make a name for myself. And that soon became into the image that I kind of still hold now as like the first Muslim woman to play basketball in hijab. And that right there, it sounds great, but it came with a lot of weight to uphold.
I can't even begin to imagine that. And I grew up in India and then obviously had a lot of, Hindu and Catholic and Muslim friends too, but not to the degree where, you being the first and the only, I would imagine at the time, to play as well. And not just on the court, but as a teenage girl, right? There's so much emphasis at that age on physical appearance, right? How were you navigating that personally as well, even off the court?
I think that's where the challenge came in. At the age of 15, you're realizing the beautiful parts about yourself. And really, as a woman, your hair speaks a lot about you. And I loved my hair. I loved doing it in different styles, and it was something that came with having to cover that up and not feeling beauty or not fitting the standard of beauty. And as women, it's hard because although we shouldn't compete against each other, you also, want to be seen as pretty or as, it's just natural. It's human nature for women. And so when I went through that phase, I had to figure out how to balance that. And again, when you step on the court, you don't worry about those things. So my safe haven was basketball. When you step in those 4 lines, it's like, we're winning this game and we're going to do whatever we have to do. And so, again, basketball was my crutch to kind of get through that social struggle at such a young age.
I just had goosebumps listening to you talk about that. That is so powerful, right? To be able to completely compartmentalize at that point and focus on you, your teammates, and just the court. Jason, you had very much of an epiphany as well, being on the basketball court in a different lens. And there's a picture just above your left shoulder, which is what first caught my eye when we were talking. And it looked like you were the only. And tell us more about the team. Tell us more about those experiences and what that was like for you.
Yeah, it was a great experience, and it's interesting when folks see that picture, and it's just a really old picture. It just sparks a lot of discussion and why, but Neela, yeah, that was an 8th grade picture, an 8th grade basketball team. I was the only white player at an all black basketball team, and it was a district team. So, which frankly, I don't know how I made it, but I did. And I was the only, not only was I the only white player, but I was the only player for my school. The other schools in the area at that time had gone through an incredible change, and a lot of kids moving out from Chicago, mostly black schools. And so, it was me, riding on the bus, going to other schools, going to practices, and because we were a district team, unfortunately, we had to play bigger teams, which was really challenging. And so a lot of those bigger teams were in South Chicago. And I would regularly be the only white person in the entire city square block. And it was just very interesting what Bill Key said earlier was that, when you get on the court, it doesn't really matter anymore. When you get on the court, you just want to play. And that's sort of the true equalizer is actually getting out to play. I'll tell you that, I can't even imagine some of the things that, the other panelists had said. I was mistreated a little bit. But as I said earlier, I always had my sort of bubble of my white neighborhood privilege to go back to. And so it was just very, very interesting, but such a great, great time. One funny thing is that, I'd walk into these gyms and a lot of these schools were very poor. I still remember, for some reason, I remember changing in the science rooms, with my basketball team. It was just weird. You got to remember, 13, what do I know? Nothing. But I walk into these gyms and I hear things, just all sorts of things. But I always hear things like, white boy's definitely really slow, but I bet he could shoot. Well, I had half of that right. I could shoot, but I was actually, believe it or not, blessed somehow with incredible speed. So, that led to opportunities with Junior Olympics and college sports and that sort of a thing. And one more funny thing is my mom is very white, just like me, but very blonde hair. And so we'd go to these games together. She'd show up in inner city Chicago, where she was raised. And the moms would be talking about which kids, their kid, what position they're playing. And the moms would just look at my mom and they'd all laugh together and have such a good time. And I got to tell you, Neely, to me, the opportunity of playing with other kids in those other gyms, it was just so special. Like I said, the true equalizer, getting out on the court, everyone's equal. And my team, I got to tell you, we treated each other with nothing more than respect. And I would even call it a brotherhood.
You mentioned more than one sort of the privilege part, Jason, and for just a brief fleeting moment, right? You didn't have privilege relative to otherwise how you would. What did that feel like?
It felt different, and it felt sometimes out of my norm. As a young person, I was challenged to really get out of my norm every week, every day, every basketball game. And sometimes I was very nervous. Truth be told, I almost quit the team. Because I was so scared. I'm a young person. Yes, I was extremely competitive, and some would say I still am now. I don't think so. But I almost quit the team. And I never forget our coach, Greg Lewis, Coach Lewis, said to me, Jason, would really like you in the team. I know that you have some challenges, but, just the coach was very, very helpful and supportive, as were all the players on that team, and just really had a tremendous, tremendous time. But, Neely, I guess I was nervous, almost sick to my stomach at times, and it's kind of sad. I mean, I only had to deal with that situation for a limited time. And I had my sort of escape through sports, if you will. I knew I could play ball. Okay. I can play okay. But it was strange. I got to tell you, growing up in a mostly all white neighborhood, which changed dramatically in my high school years, but it was something. But with my mom regularly, again, bringing me into Harvey, into South Chicago to volunteer, and I was probably 6, 7, 8 years old at the time. It really paved the way to appreciate that. And I got to tell you, that helped a lot with going through that experience.
Sure. Kenna, you've had at a similar age and time as well, a very uncomfortable feeling, but for completely different reasons, right? You're getting into boarding school. And at that point, you started becoming more aware about things about yourself. Talk to me through that.
Yeah. So while I was in boarding school and a little bit before then, I still cared about basketball incredibly. That's where I focused on my time. But I also knew that I was very different than some of my teammates in a way. And I had this realization in the back of my head that I was gay. And I knew that, this was not something I could change when I was even younger and early high school and the middle school, I would, try to date girls, but I knew after a while that that was not for me. But I also knew in terms of my safety and my acceptance and even my relationship with my teammates and even possibly coaches that being gay would probably not have been acceptable, or even if it was, it would have been a very difficult journey. So that kind of changed my relationship in terms of while Jason was aesthetically different than his team in terms of visually he didn't fit in. I knew that a part of myself also did not fit in, but it was kind of in a more insidious fashion.
Yeah, yeah. And I know when you and I spoke about that as well, you mentioned even the fact that you didn't want to come out because there was also conditioning about how, if you were gay, how that would affect your performance on the basketball court.
Yeah, so I wanted to, my goal throughout my childhood was to go to the NBA, to be the best basketball player I could, to go to a Division I school. And I never saw anyone in the NBA or even the NFL, NHL, MLB, really any professional sport. I never saw any gay men. And in contrast, I saw some of those very superstar sports athletes I looked up to be homophobic, say homophobic things in the game or in press conferences. So I thought, these are the people I look up to. This is where I want to go. And not only do I not fit in, but they are actively against, my identity. So it made me really question if I could kind of continue to be an athlete or be good in this space if I was in reality gay.
What changed over that Thanksgiving break when you came home from that first college season?
Yes. So it was about midway through my first college season. I went to Hamilton College, which is a small school near Syracuse. And by that time, I was playing really well. And I was one of the better, if not the best player on the team at that point. And I realized that, I can be whoever I want to be, whoever I am, and that's not going to stop me. And I also realized that keeping up this mask and this facade was really draining to me, and it was more important for me to be happy personally than keep up this mask just for the the comfortability of someone else.
And you came home and you spoke to your parents.
Yeah, so I came out to my parents on Thanksgiving Day of my freshman year, and I also knew in the back of my mind that if it did not go the way I had planned for it to go, I had a friend picking me up and going back to school the next day. So it was the most radical and liberating experience I've probably ever had, just expressing who I really was. I can still remember how much I was shaking, how much I was hesitating, and how much I was sweating. But it felt incredible. But then going back to school the next day, it was weird to have to feel like a bird that was let out of the cage and then have to fly right back into that cage and then close it up again. So it really made me realize how important being genuine would be to my happiness. And that's kind of where I started to let the dominoes fall.
How did your parents react to that time when you came out to them?
Mm-hmm. It was a surprise for sure. I had this facade down to a T, and I think being an athlete, being a successful competitive basketball player, you don't really see that many, even now, that many queer people in that space. So I think for them it was an incredible surprise, but luckily they were very inclusive and accepting and loving towards me, and I definitely am grateful for that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm sure, and that obviously empowers you to keep doing that for others as well, as I know you shared with me. You've been helping other athletes too. So I'm so glad for your parents' support, especially in that day and time.
Absolutely, thank you.
Bilkis, how was that for you? There was so much press and coverage, and this novelty, if you would, of here's a girl wearing a hijab that looks completely different from others, and you started getting attention at the high school level and colleges were coming after you. What was that recruitment process like, and how did your parents and you navigate that?
So early on, it started really with uniform when I was a freshman in high school. And at that time, of course, there was no dry fit material. There were no sports hijabs that you can find now. So I was in like a full sweatsuit. So I remember actually going into Dick's Sporting Goods and we're just searching like, what is the lightest piece of material? So of course we found the thin cotton pants, a thin shirt, but still, I was still burning up on that court. And it was funny because the question that I would often get was like, are you hot in that? And I'm like, duh, I have 5 other layers than you. Of course I'm hot, but Honestly, like having that as a hindrance just made me play even harder because a lot of people thought like, question what I wore. But fast forwarding to college, making a name for myself and actually breaking the scoring record in Massachusetts for boys and girls high school basketball really put me at a place in the media where I was like accepted. It wasn't novelty. It was like a phenomenon. People had no idea that Muslim women could hoop, So it was nice to go into college with this sense of pride in a way. And I guess a little ounce of fame, in which that fame could definitely hurt you in a lot of different ways. But anyway, it was good for me because I still needed to again kind of fit in, I was, asked to meet President Obama. I went to the White House and ate dinner during Ramadan with the president. So it was all amazing. And when I got recruited, my parents just wanted to make sure that I was going to be religiously comfortable. Mm-hmm. So when I visited the University of Memphis, out of all the schools that, recruited me, they actually brought me to a mosque, a local mosque in Tennessee. I was able to meet a Muslim professor. And when we were on that visit, we felt the most comfortable. And that's when I, made that decision to go to University of Memphis. They accommodated my uniform. That's when, of course, the Nike combat gear was out. I had amazing dry fit material. I mean, they took care of me for sure. And so that was, I'm still thankful for that till this day.
And did you tell your parents, look, I got the scholarship, no fees for you to pay?
I mean, they were so proud of me. And honestly, just seeing that from my parents was a breath of fresh air. And so that it paid off. That grind since that 12-year-old time to even now, I'm just thankful to have had that support from my family through that. And then just, I don't know where I found kind of that strength to push through. Sometimes I'm like, how?
You're stronger than you think you are, and you are living proof of that.
Thank you.
Jason, you've had an interesting trajectory as well in terms of diversity too. Here you are, a white guy growing up on the south side of Chicago, playing with an all-black team. I know you've married a Latina and you have biracial kids. You're like a walking United Nations, basically. So what is that experience like for you and your family now? And how have you all been having these conversations around diversity and inclusion and just your family dynamic?
Yeah, that's funny, by the way you just said that, Neil. I hadn't really thought about it that way before.
I'm going to trademark that, by the way, just you wait.
Growing up in my household, it was very natural that we had a very welcoming environment, a very respectful environment, and just appreciated and embraced diversity and learning about different cultures. When hearing the stories that I just heard, I mean, these panelists, these are very inspiring, and I have hardly any of that experience, but I do recall the names that I was called in the gymnasiums and how I was treated by different cultures. It made me absolutely sick to my stomach. I'd actually get ill. But you know what? Again, I had to deal with that for 60 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, whatever the case may be. And that appreciation and seeing how that, the lack of respect, the negativity, how hurtful it can be. And I had a taste of that. It's kind of carried me through my profession and what I do for a living as a public servant and just wanting to build community and embrace the richness of diversity. And yeah, it probably had a lot to do. You mentioned my wife, Shelly, married a Latina, and my kids, Cole and Sierra. I've just always been probably a lot to do, full credit to that basketball experience. Always been interested in bringing together different cultures. And I find myself, because of that experience, not so quick to judge. And because I remember how it hurt, and so I've just, I've always been more interested in bringing together difference of opinion, however hurtful at times, just to appreciate folks bringing their difference to the table. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Kenna, speaking of being judged, you mentioned Thanksgiving with your parents, but then you had to come back with the mask on to a team. And you had a coach that believed in you and supported you as well over your Christmas break. What was that process like when you came out, and how did that change your dynamic with the team and your teammates?
Yeah, so I came out to my coach over Christmas break. So from Thanksgiving to Christmas, I was still closeted to everyone, and I chose him because he really, believed in me as a basketball player. He told me when I got to campus my first year, he thought I could be an All-American at my school, and just having that bond with him, as a coach and player, I really trusted him. So I came out to him, and he was really understanding, and just from knowing I had his support, it gave me a little bit more confidence. And that spring, after my season had finished, I first came out to two of my friends. The other two Black men on the team, we were all first year players. And while I don't think either of them were really equipped with the terminology or had really, had many gay friends in the past, let alone, gay athletes, gay teammates, they both were really accepting of me and, did their best to let me know that they had my back. And from that point, through my sophomore year and my junior year, I became more and more confident, in my abilities as an athlete, and also more and more confident in my own character, my own identity, with my sexuality. And I realized that, me getting awards, me being an All-American, me doing all these things that are, traditionally seen as just only achievable by straight men, by hypermasculine men, I realized that I had the ability to use my platform to make other people who are kind of struggling with things feel more comfortable in their own skin.
Oh yeah, bravo, man. I mean, it's no surprise that you were the NCAA's last year's the first ever LGBTQ award recipient as well, and it's exactly for the things that you're speaking about and doing. But as you survey the landscape around you, from the time your boarding school years to now, what has changed and what hasn't still changed?
I think there's a lot more intention at being inclusive. This was the first year the NCAA even had a queer inclusive award created that specifically acknowledged people from the LGBTQ plus community. So I think there's way more representation in terms of media and in terms of institutional support, but there still is not a current out NBA player, a current out NFL player, a current out MLB player, and these people exist. So one way for us to really kind of survey environmentally how safe and how inclusive spaces are to look into these professional leagues. And if no one is coming out, that means that those spaces aren't inherently as inclusive as we probably like to think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and it's on every one of us. I think what the NCAA started is not a one-off. I mean, this is an ongoing award, so that's the beginning of maybe taking that moment and making it a movement. Right. But I think it's on every one of us in our own ways to continue building on that. And I know, Bilquis, you faced resistance too coming out of college when you wanted to play as well. And again, with the hijab and the rules FIBA had in place, what were those struggles like for you?
Yeah, so of course, after reaching that goal of getting a Division I scholarship, my next goal was like, okay, well, I am pretty good. Why not try to take my talent to the professional level? And I had a great senior season at Indiana State University and got an agent immediately after, trying out at one of the combines. And just through the process, I found out about a rule that FIBA had in place in regards to certain headgear. And this rule basically said you can't wear anything larger than an athletic headband. And so, after playing in the NCAA and getting a waiver to play and, kind of approve my religious attire, I was like, no problem. Like, I just played 4 years of college basketball, no questions asked. Let's tell them, I'm Muslim and this is what I practice. And when we, kind of let FIBA know, they responded saying they wanted to keep the game religiously neutral. And, I made a point that there are players with tattoos of their religious beliefs on their arms, whether it's a biblical scripture, whether it's Jesus, whatever, like, shouldn't they have to cover those up as well if we're talking about religious, neutrality, if you want to call it. Yeah. And so they basically knew that I kind of made a good point. And they said,
that is a good point.
They say, oh, well, your hijab is a safety hazard or a safety risk. And I'm like, wait, this is the softest piece of material. It had no pins in it. I didn't wear it wrapped around my neck. I tied it around my hair for that specific reason. There were no obstructive objects in it. And I'm thinking, like, the only thing I could logically think of was, what do they think? It's like magic. It's going to come off my head, trip up the other players, you know, allow me to go on a fast break. Like, what is this? And after they said safety, never heard anything back. And that's when we kind of realized, you know what? I would have been the first Muslim woman to wear hijab in the pros. Is it discrimination? You know, so we were trying to see what I could do to potentially play. And when we're just trying to get to more, you know, talk to more people in FIBA, they cut off all communication. And so here I was with 3 months before I should have signed with the team overseas. Those 3 months went by fast. And I was faced with, you know, really, I was at a crossroad. And that's when I started to question things about myself, about my faith, and whether or not I should play without my hijab. So it was a tough time for me personally.
How did you come out of that?
Man, for a while, you know, I was questioning who I truly was. And there were times where I would get advice to say, well, you know, take it off for the game and then put it back on. And, you know, to those people, I would say, no, the scarf means more than that. But then behind closed doors, I was like, that kind of makes sense. You know, I would be in a country where nobody knows me. You know, I was coming up with all these thoughts to really compromise my belief in my faith just to play. But something in my heart wouldn't allow me. And then I would get, at the time that I was actually going through this situation, I would get tagged on social media by other young Muslim girls across the globe saying, like, I want to be like you. You know, they would have their leggings on with their basketball shorts and their hair covered with their basketball. And I was like, this isn't about me anymore. And so I had to step outside of myself and realize that I had to stand up for them. If I don't pave this path, then who's going to do it?
Yeah. Bravo to you. Bravo to you. Jason, you know, you're helping sort of pave the path for the next generation of youth and kids, both in the organization you lead, but also in the entire community you're providing things for. How are you creating a more safe, inclusive space, like Kenna mentioned, like Bilquis mentioned as well, in your workspace, that other leaders can look at and think and perhaps implement if they don't do it already?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, I generally have been attracted to situations that there is a little bit of turbulence, if you will, that there is maybe lack of respect. And I attribute that back to, again, as I mentioned earlier, you know, that basketball experience. And so I just, you know, I don't get too excited about, you know, people having drastic or extreme positions. I come to the table with respect, and I try to bring that to work. I try to bring how, you know, some of the influences and how I was raised to, yes, the groups that I work with, the team of staff, the communities that I serve. And frankly, you know, if I can't be who I am, I just move on. You know, it's not that I'm afraid of trying to make things right, but you know, as folks had just mentioned, how they were not able to be who they are and how hurtful that is, you know. So I'm attracted to opportunities that people are truly wanting to move in a positive direction to bring groups together. So yeah, it's very common that I, because of those experience, I think it's common that I help with inclusivity boards in communities, and helping with nonprofits that have different types of missions and valuing the community. And honestly, I'm attracted to more opportunities in serving people that are interested in inclusive situations. And I just, this is kind of who I am, you know, and I'm in my late 40s now, and I'm not really going to change, I suppose, you know. And so I feel so just inspired by listening to these stories here. Talk about, you know, the future of leadership. You look right here on the screen of these two individuals, and in any way, you know, whether it's coaching or giving back, or I think folks are even doing public speaking to continue to discuss those positive experiences with those challenges, I think is a really good thing for communities, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we've just, we've just gone through a Black History Month and a Women's History Month as well. So as men or as white males as well, etc., how can we be better allies?
I think it's with acceptance and respect, and appreciating that someone's going to come in and into the conversation and maybe have a difference of opinion, and don't be so quick to judge. I think that a lot of the problems that we're having is that we're with connecting is just lack of respect and lack of appreciation where someone's coming from. So I would just say that anytime folks have the opportunity to get more immersed in different cultures, even if it's a little out of their norm, do it. Because you know what? You're going to have a lot of fun, and you're going to feel just more successful in your endeavors.
And I think sports, obviously, as we all know, is such an organic way to do that, right? Your jerseys and your team are so much more of the uniter than the so-called differences that we often use to perhaps divide us, right? And you talked about public speaking and sort of, using that platform. And Kenna, I know you've just started doing that as an educator in public speaking as well, and your social justice focus. So as we sort of wrap this up as well, what is your message, your vision, your call to action for the future?
Absolutely. I think all people should work to make, this country, this planet as inclusive as possible. So if you are in a majority position, if you are in a position of privilege, do everything that you can to make your space more inclusive. And that means in some capacities, dropping your ego and just listening and uplifting other voices. That means sometimes learning and doing the work to really understand the problem that other people are experiencing. But just know that if you're fighting for change, it is not a passive experience. It is something that you need to be really intentional about. So
yeah. And Bilquis, I started with you. I want to sort of wrap this up with you as well. In your ongoing journey, you are now a mom to an adorable young man, and you're looking at sort of inspiring him, but also generations of women to come, including my 3-year-old girl, who in a few years is going to watch this and watch you and be inspired by it. So what is your message and call to action? How do we bring about change and support you?
Number one, I would say educate. And not only others, but to educate yourself first. And that's a reminder to myself first. And I think that when we are trying to make change, the change happens in small groups. And that small group could be your family. So if you're having troubles within your family with acceptance or inclusion, or, just being better people, then that's who we change. And then they can make change in their pockets of people and their friends. And then that change will then grow. So, a lot of times when we want change and we want things to happen quickly, we forget that it happens in our own personal spaces. And so again, educate yourselves, and then make change in small areas, and just watch it grow from there.
Yeah, I love it. And I hear a little sound behind as well. So there you go.
Sorry.
No, it's perfect. It's what's made this whole COVID world so beautiful is we realize we have lives outside of work, right? Kids, pets, what have you. And I certainly hope as we come on the other side of the pandemic, and God willing soon, that we remember these lessons, right? Of what truly matters is the human connection and people. And, to all your points, as Jason said, be the leader we wish we had, right? Don't be so quick to judge. To Kenna's point as well, if you have the privilege, be sure to have a seat at the table and a voice for those that may not. And then to your point, Bilquis, starting with each one of us, we have to be the change we wish to see in the world, right? We have to start with educating ourselves. And then the ripple effect of that over time will certainly be the tipping point. So this is just the beginning. I am very, very grateful to all three of you. For those of you watching, please look them up online, connect with them. I know Kenna is not on social media, but at least connect with him via email or look them up. Educate yourself on the resources we're sharing as well through today and going forward. And together, let's make a dent in the universe. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neely.